one of the first things again that I'll say is sit down, create a list of what you owe and what you own. That can really help you to get clarity when and if you do meet with an attorney and going through your assets. That's one of the things that they're going to ask you. Who are your important people and your important contacts?
Hello, and welcome to Not Born Yesterday, a podcast dedicated to older adults and the challenges and joys of aging. I'm Miriam Goodman. Not Born Yesterday examines the problems and solutions of growing older today. We bring you the wisdom and voices of experts in the field of aging and offer tips on how to feel your best, use your lifetime skills and experience, and make the coming months and years as fulfilling as possible.
I'm Lynn Winter Gross. Not Born Yesterday is brought to you by Next Village SF, a local nonprofit providing older adults with support to help age in place.
Today on Not Born Yesterday, we're talking about something that might be a bit uncomfortable: organizing your affairs. Whether you're an older adult wanting to leave your estate in a stress-free and unconfusing way, or an adult child wanting to support your parent with their plan, this conversation is for you. We must talk about plans because while most people don't want to talk about death at any age, too many of us die without an estate plan, leaving their families overwhelmed. And if you think a plan is just for the super rich or older adults, stay tuned. Because as our guest says, preparing now is one of the greatest acts of love you can give to your family.
Our guest today is Rachel Donnelly, author of Late to Your Own Funeral: How to Leave a Legacy, Not a Logjam. Her book highlights the importance of organizing and transmitting information so that your heirs are empowered rather than inundated with questions about your intentions and overcome with trying to find essential documents.
Rachel, welcome to Not Born Yesterday.
Thank you so much for having me, Miriam and Lynn.
So in your book, you refer to yourself as an after-loss professional. So what do you mean by that?
So an after-loss professional is sort of a skilled project manager that helps overwhelmed individuals, mainly executors, administrators, trustees of an estate, manage the unavoidable logistics of settling their loved one's affairs or the estate.
So how did you get into this business?
I created the role that I felt was really lacking and missing in the market in terms of practical and administrative support. Unfortunately, I lost my parents at young ages. And when my mom died pretty suddenly, she left me to take care of her brother, my uncle, who was in latter stages of Parkinson's disease. And I really noticed, like I said, that there was a lack in the market. And I said, why isn't there sort of a skilled project manager, a wedding coordinator, but for death, who can help me manage all of these logistics? So one day a light bulb went off and I said, I'm going to create this, and my business and these services were born.
You wrote that if you don't have a will, your state will create one for you, and they will distribute the assets without knowing what your personal wishes are, who in your family you like or dislike, who you stop speaking to. Is a written will enough?
It's not enough, and although it's a great start, I want to applaud anyone who takes that step in terms of getting their affairs in order. But what I also want to caution people in doing is taking a document-based approach to estate planning and just creating documents and saying, oh, I'm done, right? This should be a strategic, sort of comprehensive strategy of looking at your wishes, your goals, what you want your legacy to be, and crafting an estate plan based on that. And having just a document is not good enough. I really wrote my book to have people look at this through a different lens of who is going to be in charge and do they have the tools in the toolbox to do the job. So do they know they're going to be your executor? Do they know where your important documents are? And thinking of you're leaving a part-time job for somebody that they may not know how to do that job.
So just yesterday, I was talking to a retired financial planner, and he said to me, "I'm always shocked at how financially illiterate most people are." So, how much of planning is about money and how much of it is about legacy?
Yeah, I'd say, it's of course both, right? And many people think, oh, I don't have a lot of assets, therefore I don't need to do any planning. And if you owe and if you own, right, you need a plan. You need to leave your wishes known to those around you. And also, death is a very expensive event. So looking at through that lens of I'm becoming a more informed consumer of what will be the costs in terms of leaving my wishes and settling that estate and leaving those preferences of whether you want a traditional burial or not. And then also, like I said, leaving that breadcrumb trail of where all of your assets and your debts may be so that your executor, whoever's in charge, doesn't have to spend that time and perhaps more costs tracking things down. So a lot of it is not only just being unfamiliar with the terms, but unfamiliar with the process. And if you know what is involved, then you will be, I think, a more informed consumer in terms of planning your own estate and what comes after.
So, what are some barriers people face if there is no plan or if they can't find the plan? I have a
Yeah.
friend who died, and all of his plans were on his computer, and nobody knew the passwords.
Yeah, exactly. And so I always say, an unshared will, an unshared plan, unshared documents is as good as no plan at all. So, if you don't leave the breadcrumbs and tell people where your important documents are, and then your estate is presumed intestate, or you're assumed that you did not write a will, then as you said, your state will write one for you, and that may not fall in line with your preferences or wishes. You may have a jet-setting dad who you haven't talked to in 20 years, and part of your estate may go to him, and that is not your preference. I think people have that barrier if they feel that if they tell people about their estate plan, that's going to lead to an earlier death and sort of that superstition. We can have a lot of superstitions around this, and it leads people to do nothing at all and sort of be paralyzed.
So it seems that estate planning is really an act of love as it spares
Yeah.
our heirs from the burden of figuring out who to pay, who not to pay, where to find the records and everything. But so many times families get together and say, oh, that's not what mom would have wanted. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, and that's why, I say leaving those wishes very much documented and legally binding as much as possible will, for the most part, not lead to no confusion among family members. I had a client that I was working with, and one sister said, "Oh, dad wanted to be cremated." The other one said, "Dad never said that," right? And so, unfortunately, he sat in the morgue for 6 weeks before the family would finally sign off to that because they were just at odds. And so, I think having family meetings as much as possible, having those conversations, and then to the extent possible, like I said, formalizing your affairs with your attorney and saying, writing down what you want to have happen in the best way possible. Like I said, we'll leave no confusion.
A few minutes ago, Lynn mentioned the horror stories about someone's digital life, not being able to
Right.
get into that. And even if the person thinks they've done everything right, there's that problem. And I know I often get emails saying, wish John a happy birthday. And I know John died 3 years ago or something
Yeah,
like that. So
yeah.
is there any way we can avoid any of that, the digital footprint we leave behind?
There are several ways that you can do that. So, that's one of the tasks that I help clients with is now having helped clients on over 100 estates. I've seen sort of the common blind spots that people miss or they don't know that they need to plan for. And one of those aspects is the digital asset piece of it. There are different types of digital assets. There can be assets with financial value, with of course, your online bank accounts. There can be assets with sentimental value, your photos, your videos of your kids and grandkids. And then there can be those assets with exchange value, say airline points or Amazon, points or things like that. So one of the things that you can do is I encourage clients to do is to speak with their attorney, make sure that their will, their trust, and their power of attorney gives their agent, their trustee, their executor authority over digital and tangible assets. And of course, you need to speak with your attorney and your estate about that. But then there are certain beneficiary tools that you can utilize. For instance, Google has an inactive account manager that you can utilize to name someone to be in charge of your Google account, shall you be incapacitated or if you die. So I've named my husband as my inactive account manager. And if I haven't checked my email in 3 months, he'll get an email saying, we see that Rachel has left the building for a while. Is everything okay? And do you need to sort of spring this to action? Apple has one as well. You can name a legacy contact, Facebook. I read an article years ago. I don't know if this is still true, but they said that by 2035, there will be more deceased people on Facebook than alive. I don't know if that's still true, if that's an urban legend, but it does get you to think, do I want my Facebook account to be out there and to be there if I'm no longer here?
Wait, so you said there's a way to get off of Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram, all those things?
Yeah, I mean, either if you don't choose ahead of time a legacy contact for your Facebook page, you can reach out to Facebook and have them shut it down. You need to prove the legal authority, of course, and we help do that for clients with LinkedIn, with Instagram. But there are ways that you can share your preferences. When I'm working with clients, I have them write a letter of instructions to their family, one part that includes, please delete all of my social media accounts, right? Or please delete these, memorialize this one, so that there's that sort of preemptive thought planning ahead of time rather than accounts staying out there.
So some people may think that once the assets have been assigned to their spouse, that covers everything. But you say in your book that there are things like individually owned stocks or even Social Security survivorship that require a specific beneficiary. So how do we take care of those issues?
Yes, many people don't realize that if our assets are in their name only, whether it's a piece of property that was left to you by a grandparent, right? If it's in your name only and your spouse's name is not jointly held, then that will become an estate asset that you'll need to prove should be, bequested to you. This is why I always say, creating a list of your assets and debts, looking at how they're titled, who owns the account, is there a way to add a beneficiary, and then doing that as much as possible, of course, under the guidance of an attorney, to prevent any possible probate.
Well, before we jump into what an estate plan should look like, you say there's some questions we want to ask ourselves, such as what kind of assets do you have and how much might they be worth? Who do you want to inherit these things and who's in charge?
So I'd say anything, of course, that has a financial value to it that you can assign, but also sentimental value that you can assign. I'd say that you could include that in your list of assets, creating whether that's a spreadsheet, whether that's a piece of paper, really thinking through what is valuable to me. And then, reviewing that with your attorney and saying, how do we handle this? How do I make sure that my grandfather's cane that my son loves so much, that reminds him of his great grandfather, right? How do we handle that?
Because my other son wants that cane too.
Yes, exactly, right? So coming up with a plan and maybe tackling that before you're gone.
What about the forms you can get online? Is that a good way to get started?
There's a lot of information out there. I would say you doing some research online, whether it's, looking at what some attorneys in your area, maybe looking at researching about what is the probate process in your state. That might be a great way, to start, looking at advanced healthcare directives for your specific state. Maybe utilizing an online tool like AARP has advanced care directives that you can access, and they prompt you through some different questions. Compassion and Choices has some great options. But by and large, I would not say there is one tool online that blanketly gives people the proper guidance of how to set up their estate of where they are.
So it sounds like what we've done is scared people into thinking it's going to be a long process. So I wonder if we could have some advice on how to break down doing an estate plan into sort of manageable steps, what to do first. And I know so many things you sit down and think, oh, it's going to take me 10 hours to do this.
Right.
And in 2 hours, you think this is really good. I feel so relieved that I'm doing this and I can finish this by tomorrow. So how do we get started and how do we make it manageable?
One of the first things, again, that I'll say is sit down, create a list of what you owe and what you own. That can really help you to get clarity when and if you do meet with an attorney and going through your assets. That's one of the things that they're going to ask you. Who are your important people and your important contacts? And, who do you want to leave? What assets? So you creating that list of assets and debts is, of course, one. Who will be in charge, and thinking through that not only when you pass away, so who'll be your executor, but who will be your financial power of attorney, your durable power of attorney, who will be your healthcare agent. And then thinking through those decisions, like I said, will lead to hopefully more streamlined conversations when you do meet with that attorney.
Can you give us some examples from your own experience of people who've left a good plan and how it works, and people who have not left a plan at all and what happened to those errors?
Yeah. So, I'd say one of a great story that I shared in my book was about a client whose father passed away, and he was very forthcoming and sharing of what he wanted to have happen at the end of his life. He was very cognizant in sharing where his assets and where his debts were, where his important documents were, who the important people were. He wanted to pass away at home. He shared the music that he wanted to have playing when he was dying, if possible. He shared that he wanted to have family surrounding him to tell stories about their times together. And, even though we worked together because there was still that time in settling the estate, it was such a beautiful process for him to share, and his father being so forthcoming and sharing as many things as possible, and how he wanted his last remaining days to go out. And then there was really no guessing about what his wishes and goals were and where everything was.
So the subtitle of your book is How to Leave a Legacy and Not a Logjam. So tell us about some log jams.
Oh, gracious. So many log jams. I had a client who reached out to me and she said, you're going to think I'm crazy. But I got a call a couple of months ago from an attorney who said that my ex-husband, who we've been divorced for over 50 years, died and has made you the executor. And they had not spoken in 50 years. And she had no idea about his life, about his bank accounts, about his house, his cars, his retirement. So when I didn't know if this was the ultimate gesture of respect or the ultimate form of revenge. I really do not know. But
Rachel, you're not an attorney that people would use. What is the profession that you have, and how do people find people like you to help them if they end up in this situation?
Yeah, so I have helped to co-found the professional organization for after loss professionals, which is called PALS. PALS, Professionals of After Loss Services. And we are the first and only community for after loss professionals. If we have now trained after loss professionals all over the world to help walk alongside overwhelmed executors and help them make sense of the process, triage tasks, streamline tasks, and then sort of serve as air traffic control, right, with all of the other professionals that walk alongside them. So you can learn more about us at afterlosspros.com, and we have membership, training, and business affiliates.
Well, thank you so much for talking about this somewhat uncomfortable subject with us. I know our listeners are now more educated and motivated to move ahead with that estate planning they've been putting off, or to think about it in terms of needing to do it rather than being too emotionally involved. So our guest was Rachel Donnelly, author of Late to Your Own Funeral, How to Leave a Legacy and Not a Logjam. Today on News You Can Use, we're talking about elder speak. If you don't know what that is, it is a term some people use to communicate with older adults that carry a sting when used in professional settings. While often used with dementia patients and other older adults, it is also a result of culture and well-meaning approaches that some caregivers use in an attempt to make older people feel they are liked. You know the terms sweetheart, honey, sweetie pie, and the use of those plural pronouns and phrases like, are we ready for a bath now? And so on. While often unintentional and meant to convey warmth or kindness, elder speak can come across as patronizing, diminish a person's sense of autonomy, and reinforce negative stereotypes about aging.
Research has shown that elder speak can have real consequences. It's been linked to increased resistance to care in people with dementia and can contribute to feeling of helplessness or low self-esteem in otherwise independent older adults. Being called sweetie instead of by your name or being spoken to in a sing-song tone may imply incompetence or childlike dependence, messages that older adults neither need nor deserve. Sometimes elder speakers think they need to speak loudly, slowly, or they may use words like potty or jammies. Studies in nursing homes show how commonplace such speech is. One team analyzed recordings of interactions between staff and residents with dementia and found that 84% involve some form of elder speak.
The path to ending elder speak starts with awareness and training. Caregivers and healthcare professionals must be encouraged to use respectful language that treats elders as the adults they are. That means addressing individuals by their preferred name or title, avoiding condescending tones, and engaging in meaningful two-way communication. Rather than oversimplifying speech or using exaggerated praise, professionals should focus on active listening and preserving dignity. We know that language is powerful, and it takes time for people to break a habit of speech. Look what feminists went through when trying to use the neutral term Ms. rather than one that specified their marital status. So if you don't like being called sweetie, or your loved one is in a hospital or nursing home doesn't like it either, gently explain this to the caregiver. Change may take a while, but once the message has been delivered and understood, everyone will feel a bit more independent and respectful.
And that's our podcast for today. Our thanks to our guest Rachel Donnelly, author of Late to Your Own Funeral. You can learn more about Next Village SF at their website, nextvillagesf.org. Our theme music is from Hook Sounds, and Jason Dahlstedt is our engineer. And we thank you for listening. We'd love to hear what you would like us to discover and discuss. If you like this episode, please let us know by sending us a message at notbornyesterdaypodcast.org. And tell us about your experience with creating an estate plan. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. All of these are free, and they let us know you better. Be well, stay strong, and remember, you weren't born yesterday. I'm Lynn Winter Gross.
And I'm Miriam Goodman.